Hi, and thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. I am Whitney Wiley, and this is Thursday, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and we are here to talk all things leadership. And today we're going to be talking about responsibility, responsibility as a leader. And so, as I was thinking about this, it's interesting because leadership, like lots of other things, right? Ultimately, what you do and how you do it is up to you, right? And the question is, what is it that you want to get from what you're doing? What is your goal? What's your vision? What outcome are you seeking? And generally, I think we'd like to focus on being effective leaders, right? And getting an outcome that doesn't revolve around us sort of taking a step back into the dark ages on how we approach interacting with people. But being an effective leader means different things to different people, just like leadership means different things to different people. And while we have some general concepts about what that means, ultimately, you have to decide for you and those that you are leading within the context of the organization that you are in, what that means. And that may mean as you move from one entity to another, it changes, right? So there's some adaptability there. There is some strategy involved in that. There is some requirement for you to be flexible. So, Robert, what say you?
Yeah, this is an interesting topic because when we're talking about responsibility and in the context of an organization, leaders and their responsibility, one of the things that always comes up for me is that as a leader, one of the things that you're responsible for is to model behaviors you want other people to see. And so, and that boils down to not only an overarching thing when it comes to leadership, but the little daily tasks that you expect people to do and adhere to, the rules that you expect them to adhere to, and also your responsibility as a leader of growing the organization's future leaders. And so I can get into some examples of what not to do, and I will do that a little bit later. But first, let's start out with knowing that your responsibility, the overarching thing, is to really be a role model of leadership for your team members.
Okay. I agree with you. You have to be a role model, or leading by example is part of that responsibility, right? And again, it's regardless of what entity that you are operating in, but that piece may change, right? Somewhat based on the culture. And so here's a question. How does one, if you are in a culture that is, let's say, different from the last culture you were in, and the expectations of you as a leader has shifted, but let's say they're not exactly in alignment with who you are, your values, the way you want to lead, how does that translate?
That's a great question. I think the first and foremost, the thing that you need to do is before you decide to take on a leadership role in an organization is to ask some questions about some of the values of that organization. You and I talk about this all the time on the show. But the second thing is really keeping your eyes open and looking at the culture, especially if you're a new leader coming into an organization. One of the first things you need to do is look at what's going on in your organization, not necessarily what they are saying, but what they are saying and doing. Because sometimes an organization will say something, but do something different, or a leader will say something and do something different or slightly different. So ask questions around that, pay attention to that stuff. And then you can figure out if you haven't taken that leadership role, if you want to take that leadership role, and if you're in that leadership role already, perhaps you agreed to to do some things before you really got an opportunity to really, quote unquote, do your research. Look at how you can maneuver in that in a way that is authentic to you. Ask some questions around that. One of the things that I see coming up, or I've seen happen in an organization, is someone comes from the outside and they have a reputation as getting a lot of stuff done in their previous organization. And then they come to their new organization and their leader says, hey, I need you to get some stuff done. We hired you because we were lacking in a few things. We need some things moving in a direction. Get it done. I don't really care how you do it. And then the leader starts doing things, and it usually will gets them in trouble because they are doing things that are counter culture. So you really need to pay attention when a leader says to you, I don't care how you do it. What they're really saying to you is, I don't care how you do it in the context of our culture. So you need to pay attention to how other leaders get things done in that culture.
So, that's an interesting point, because I want you to get something done. Usually, no one's giving you the real opportunity to actually get to know the culture and to understand how things get done. So how does one balance the two? I've got to be productive and get something done, and I don't quite know how work gets done here, right? Which is ultimately the sort of the bottom line definition of culture, is how things get done. And if I don't know that, how can you expect me to actually produce, be productive?
I think I kind of already said what the first part of this is, ask some questions, look around, get to know your colleagues, especially the ones that are successful in your new organization, and ask them some questions about how they do things, how they maneuver in the organization, how, what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable. And I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is there are certain things that every leader needs to do to be successful. These are the basic things. These are like educating your team, right? Giving them clear direction, communicating clearly, articulating your vision. Those things are outside of culture. So make sure you do those things first, and then at the same time as going out there and asking other people, inquiring what is acceptable in your organization. How do people get things done? How do things maneuver? How do people maneuver? And I think one of the other things, and I've worked with clients on this, knowing how your new boss likes to communicate is huge. If you come from an organization where people like a lot of stuff, they like a lot of detail, that may not fly in your new organization. Find out. You can ask your boss that, ask other people that. I think it's really important, because a lot of bosses will be like, yeah, just send me stuff. It doesn't really matter. I don't really have a preference. They have a preference. So if they're not giving it to you, ask people that also interact with that boss to find out.
Is there some responsibility, some obligation in the communication, right? In learning the new job and continuing to grow in that job when you're no longer new. And I hear what you're saying, and I believe that I am I'm tracking with you, but just sort of to make sure everyone understands. As you are asking questions, to continue to ask questions, right? And it's interesting you said this, because I was sitting on an interview panel a couple of days ago, and the questions that we asked, trying to elicit comments or in examples of what people have done in particular situations, there was, it seemed to me, a lack of people really taking the time to ask questions, right? When they were going through, let's say the question had to do with learning, somebody making a mistake and learning lessons, and then applying those lessons moving forward. Just throwing this out as an example. And as a part of that process, being willing to ask the question, not just once, not just twice, right? But ask until you get an answer that actually answers your question. And it seems to me that people are often willing to ask the question once, they may even ask twice, and then it starts feeling like either I'm not too bright and I'm not getting it, rather than making sure that it boils down to communication, right? And we've talked about this. Communication is a two-way street. There's a sender of the message and a receiver of the message. If you are not receiving the message, right? If you are not getting the message, then it hasn't been properly communicated. And if it has to do with people's preferences and they're saying they don't have a preference, you've made the statement they do have a preference, right? We all have a preference. We may not even know we have a preference, right? I mean, that could be part of it. Or it's our attempt to try to be democratic or sort of laissez-faire about the whole thing, and not wanting to come across as a micromanager. But how much should one, the question after all that, the question, how much should one be willing to press, ask the question in a different way, ask again until they get the feedback and direction that they need in order to make sure that they complete the task in a way that's being asked, even if it's not asked in a way that's clear. If any of that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. Knowing when to go back and say, hey, I don't get it. Can you explain? It really depends on your relationship with that person. What I like to do is err on the side of they want to help. Because if they've agreed to meet with you or to answer any questions, they probably want to help you. In most cases, there's maybe some cases when that's not the case. But I find that there are a couple of things that's helpful. One, ask a question. Ask it a couple of different ways if you're not getting the answer that you want. Give feedback when you're done after they give you the answer to make sure you're on the same page. We had a whole episode about that. And then what I like to do is maybe compare that with another, ask another person and compare the answer. And if it's not exactly the same, go back to them or try somebody else. What I'm not a fan of, and I had a friend that used to do this, when you get an answer, you get the same answer from a bunch of people, but you want it to go in a different direction, you keep asking until you find that one person that agrees with you, and you do that thing. So especially when it comes to organizational culture, most people, they couldn't tell you, right? Like if you said, what's the culture here? They're not, they won't say, oh, it's democratic, or it's, autocratic, or it's command and control, because everybody, right. They're not going to, but they can give you examples. So ask for examples. I think that's really important. Well, tell me, ask for give me an example of when I might do that, or give me an example of when that might be okay, or give me an example of when that was not okay. So you want to make sure that you're understanding what's going on. I think that's the key part of it. And so one of your responsibilities, we're talking about responsibility, and we've branched off into culture, but I think it really matches up, because your responsibility as a leader are really to do those things, get the job done within the culture of the organization. And especially if you're a new leader and you have an established team, you're going to have a revolt if you come in and you start doing things that are counterculture.
Yes. And it's one of those sort of, is a dichotomy where where you're expected to come in and have some deliverable, right? A lot of times companies want, what as part of the interview process, somewhere in the interview process, what are going to be your 30, 60, 90-day deliverables? Well, if one, I don't know your organization and your culture. So to ask that of someone, so if you're asking that in an interview, I'm just offering this unsolicited advice. Don't. But so you come in with this pressure. And so even if they don't do that, you come in with some pressure to feel like you bring value, that they made the right decision hiring you. But your point is so well taken. If you don't take enough time, and that doesn't mean it has to take 90 days or 60 days, but some appreciable amount of time for you to sort of sit back and observe what's going on, ask the questions, interact with people so that you have a feel for what's being done, why it's done that way before you come along wanting to change things. And I will share an example from my past. I was part of this organization, and the person that I was hired under, I worked for a couple of years. We got a new boss. This person comes in, well-meaning, nice guy, right? Lovely guy, if you want to go there, but really nice guy. Pretty good at his job in the place he was before. Nothing wrong. I had worked with him in the context of the type of work we were doing. So had no problems with him doing the work as my boss, any of that. But he comes in and he had this vision of how things should work in our organization. It's a perfect example of what you're talking about. He didn't really understand all the things that we did. And I will say this, most people, whether they came to work in the organization or were just colleagues, did not understand the magnitude of all the work that we did. And so when he came, we had our very first one or two team meetings, and then he had a meeting with me and the other person that had the same position that I had. And I remember clear as day, he's saying, I want us to spend more time in the building. And the building is the Capitol building. I want us to spend more time in the building. First of all, as a goal, very non-smart, right? That's not a smart goal. I don't even know. And I think I asked him, what does that even mean? What does more time mean? If I spend one more minute there, have I achieved the goal of more time in the building? And he's like, well, more time. I was like, I don't know what that means, right? So to the point of asking, never got an answer really on what more time meant, because it really was not quantifiable what that means. He sort of said that he wanted us to be in the building more about building relationships than in our office, analyzing bills. That's fine. But if I'm in the building building relationships, who's in my office analyzing bills?
Right.
Who's in my office planning the 2 conferences we have every year and the 1-day legal event that I put on, and is scheduling those speakers and coming up with those topics and writing newsletter articles? Who's doing that stuff while I'm in building relationships? Which, I'm happy to do that. So not understanding what's going on, right? And coming in, I absolutely believe having a vision is crucial. But I think Robert's point here is that your vision, your goals have to be within the 4 corners or 6 corners or 8 corners, you want to make it an octagon or whatever, of the culture that you're operating in. Because if you don't do that, you're going to lose people along the way.
Absolutely. And the other part of responsibility as a leader is having clear communication. And that leader clearly was not communicating in a way that allowed you to understand what they meant. Sharing your vision is one thing, but you have to be clear about spending more time in the building, what that means. The other thing that comes up for me is a responsibility is doing the hard stuff. Doing the hard stuff as a leader, you're responsible for doing that, especially if you want your people to do that. So I know I've worked with lots of leaders that I think that leadership is about kicking back and putting kicking back, putting your feet up and getting all the work done. Certainly your people are going to do the lion's share of the work. That's why you have people working underneath you. But the hard stuff, that's your job to do. And I'll give you an example. In one of my previous jobs, one of the things that I did was conflict mediation. And there was a particularly difficult conflict that went on in this organization. And my boss also did conflict mediation, but he wanted me to do it. Now, these were with his people. So these were my peers. So he asked me to come in as a impartial mediator to do this. I pushed back on it. He goes, no, I want you to do it. So I did it. And after it was done, I got tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of accolades from this, but from him. But one of the people in there was really upset because they thought that based on our prior friendship, I was going to go in there and, skew things in their favor. And obviously they didn't know what mediation was. And so this was a problem. So, and this was one of those situations where I pushed back. I probably should have pushed back harder, but it caused me a lot of problems because I had to work with these people. So eventually this came to a head, and I went to my boss, and I, specifically, I said to him, I said, this is causing me a lot of problems right now, and I need you to take care of this. And I want to know, when I pushed back and asked why you didn't want, I asked you to do the conflict mediation, and you kept putting it back on me. And I asked him, I said, I need to know why you didn't want to do it. And his answer to me shocked me. He goes, I didn't want people to think that I was a bad guy. And I said to him, but it's okay if they think that I'm a bad guy.
Yes, it is.
Well, yeah. So shirking his responsibility, it's his responsibility to do the hard stuff. It's not his responsibility to be liked by everybody or to have everybody think that he's a good guy. He's the leader of the team. He needs to go out there and do that hard stuff. And his other responsibility was to shield me from that. And so he shirked that responsibility and put me right in the line of fire on that. It worked out okay. I'm still here. It wasn't, I didn't get any mortal injuries because of it, but it put me in a really bad situation.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong. At the moment, you have a responsibility in addition to the general responsibilities we talked about, or generally talk about as leaders. You're responsible for the people that you're leading, right? Helping them to develop and grow. In this context of culture, you have a response. I've got 3, and if I've missed one, let me know. You've got a responsibility to ask questions, right? To understand the culture, to understand what it is you're doing, to make sure you are asking what needs to be asked to make it possible for you to bring the reason that they hired you, right? To bring the value for which you've been hired to this particular organization. But you can't do it without understanding the context that you're working in. So asking questions, communicating with your people, right? Sort of making sure you're communicating a vision, again, within the context of where you're working, and then this do the hard stuff.
Yeah, do the hard stuff, especially if you're expecting your folks to do the hard stuff. I mean, the example that came to my mind was this: he was kind of cowering in fear of his own employees, and so he used me as a human shield. And the other part of that is reasonably fight for your people reasonably, right? Stand for your people, stand up for your team reasonably, not when they are wrong, but when they are doing the job that has been assigned to them by you, by the organization. Stand up for your people. And he did neither of those things. He didn't want to do the hard stuff and then just use me as a human shield, and that was not very pleasant.
I love that one. I am a huge believer that in the same organization and example I just shared, I would say that despite us getting off sort of on the wrong foot, and that's sort of an overstatement, about doing more and being in the building more, and a couple of other things that were thrown out as a part of that initial sort of "this is my vision for us" conversation. I will say that he was actually a boss that did a pretty good job fighting for his people. It was obvious when he wasn't, though. It was like a clear as day and night when he was fighting and when he wasn't, and sort of the response that would come back when that wasn't happening. I had another boss in that same two other bosses, I will say. One who I feel like never fought for us. I could be wrong, but I don't feel like there was ever standing up for the team. And then there was one that is one of the best bosses that I think I've had. And one of the reasons is exactly this point. Is actually the two, doing the hard stuff and then this fighting for people, fighting for the team, and not just, it wasn't just talk, right? And I wrote an article about this, and this goes sort of beyond fighting for the team, but really I'm putting my money where my mouth is in all of this. And when I say money where the mouth is, I'm being literal. So in that organization, there was we had an employee of the year, I guess contest, or I don't know what you call it, employee of the year program. Thank you. And this, my boss, as before she became part of management, won employee of the year. And so that's fine. And as of today, as far as I know, she is the only person who's won that award twice, once as an employee, once as a manager. And as a manager, there's a monetary reward that comes with that recognition. She split her award with the entire team. Right. So it wasn't life-changing money if she kept it all for her. And it certainly wasn't life-changing money splitting it up. But it sent a message, right? That when I say that we are a team, it's not lip service, right? When I am going to bat for you in executive team meetings, that's not lip service. I am here. I'm looking out for you. This recognition that I have actually is because of the work that all of you have done, right? The work that we do collectively. Yes, I lead the team, but for you guys doing your part, of which I don't have to do a lot of like micromanaging and holding people down to get it done, I wouldn't have gotten this award. So she split it. I wrote an article called, I think the article was "Putting Your Money Where Your Mouth Is," or something along that line, right? And I just see that as one of those opportunities that we all have as leaders for us to show that it's not about us and our title, right? That it really is about the team and the people on the team and how we are better together. that we can't get done what we need to get done unless everyone steps in and does their part, including me as the leader.
That is a fantastic example, and something that I have never experienced before. Not as an employee. I've never had a lead. I've had a couple of really great leaders. They are few and far between, and we talk about this all the time. But
we're trying to change that. Just so you know, because it's few and far between. The whole point of this show is to help you be part of the few and far between,
absolutely,
right? And make that the norm rather than the way things are. So.
Right, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole purpose. That's what got us working together, and that is the whole purpose of this program. But yeah, I've not experienced that before. I've had some. I think one of the reasons why is there are a lot of leaders out there that don't understand teams, and it's really not their fault. Although there are plenty of opportunities to learn about teams, but it's really not their fault, because as a society, in this country, we are built around that rugged individuality, right? That you want to be a rugged individual, you do it yourself. But when you work with a team, a lot of times, not all the time, you have everybody looking for their own self-interest.
Yeah.
And one of the things that people suggest is, if you want to promote team, you reward the team. You reward the team, not the individual. You reward the entire team, or you reward teamwork. You look for those things. Okay, if the team is collaborating, you reward that. If the team is helping each other out, you reward that. If the team is solving problems and moving in a direction, so like there's a conflict, they solve it, then you reward that. So you reward all the behaviors that teams should have, and the team will work together. But that's a new concept for a lot of people. What they tend to do is put a team together and look for individual leaders inside that team. And I'm not saying that that's not valuable, but it's less valuable than rewarding the entire team, because that is the entity. I don't want to say group, because the team is not a group. The entity that is doing the work.
It's interesting you say that. Had an experience where the team was being acknowledged for an outstanding project. We'll just call it that. It was actually an event, but the event was a project, right? So acknowledged for the project. And in the middle of the person who was saying thank you and the extraordinary work that was done, on top of all the other work that gets done, it turned to, but that's not to say the rest of you don't do a good job too. And then start rattling off what other departments were doing. And it's like, well, you just took what was I felt like a brilliant moment and opportunity to do just what you said, which was to reward the entire team, to acknowledge and reward the entire team. And because I will say this, there is a part of one that's, I don't know, I don't have multiple children, right? I only had one child. So for parents that have multiple children, and you are in a household with multiple children, right? This is my assumption from my observation. I could be wrong. Not you specifically, but parents of multiple children in general, is this need to not give one too much and not acknowledge another, right? And so there's this attempt to balance what you're saying. And in organizations, and in that moment, I felt like you're trying to keep all your children from thinking that that's your favorite. And, we're not, and it wasn't about favorites. It was about, in this moment, this team had accomplished something in particular. Acknowledge it. Then move on, right? And then next month or 2 months from now, when another team has done something that is worth acknowledging, you acknowledge them and you leave that on the table, right? You don't have to, but that's not to say everybody else does it, right? And so maybe that's one of those hard stuff things. I don't know. Again, I only had one child, and fighting for your people, right? Which is just leave it here, and then you can fight for the others at another time.
It's funny because I've used this analogy with some of the leaders that I've worked with, and I say, if you're a parent and you have a favorite, your job is to make it so that your kids don't know you have a favorite. So it's the same way with your team, that you should, it should be equal. And there are going to be some team members that you like better than others. It could be for personality. Maybe they remind you of yourself, which, by the way, is a bias, right? So similar to me bias, you want to be mindful of that. It could be because they're very knowledgeable. It could be because they step up. Whatever it is, if you have individual, rewards for that, then certainly. But if you want to reward the team, you need to treat everybody. You need to treat them like a team. That doesn't mean that there is not an opportunity for individual rewards. There can be, but you have to make that kind of separate from, hey, this is what the team did, and this is what the individual did, inside of the context.
Right. Or what another team did. It's not time for the other team. Right now, this is about this team, and let it go. Right. And so everyone knows who the favorite is anyway. You don't have to do anything in particular. You don't have to do anything in particular to make that so. It just is. So
if you have somebody that's sitting in the boss's office more than other people, they're either the favorite or the problems. It's a 50-50 chance you're going to guess right.
There you go. So those were the 4: ask, communicate, do the hard stuff, fight for your people. Final word on this.
Help your people grow. That's my final word. Also, help your people grow. You want to, as a leader, you want to grow future leaders. So they don't use this term a whole lot anymore, but care and feeding, right? The care and feeding of your team members so that they can become leaders in their own right. Maybe they don't want the responsibility that you have, and that's okay, but certainly leaders in their own right. And there's all kinds of self-leadership, there's team leadership, there's organizational leadership, but help them become leaders in their own right.
So 2 things, here's my final word. 2 things came to mind. You said, help your people grow. One was let my people go.
That was unintentional, by the way.
Like, let my people go. But in the context of help your people grow, there is a little bit of let your people go, right?
Sure.
Give them the room, the space to grow and go about doing what they're supposed to be doing without you having to, have your thumb on them. And then the care and feeding, if we've stopped saying that, we should bring it back. It's a concept that I like, and I know, terminology comes and goes, but we can bring that back. So with that, we want to thank you for joining us for the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. We are here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. If you have a topic you would like for us to cover, please drop us a note and let us know. You can drop it in the comment to this episode, or you can send an email or a message to either Robert or I. We would be happy to cover the topic if it makes sense in the context of our show. And if there's anything that we can do to be of assistance to you as a coach, a consultant, please reach out. We would schedule a consultation session with you and then we can see how we can, and if we can, be of service to you and or your organization. So again, we want to thank you, and until next time, take care.
Bye.